All right, let's get started. All right, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Tim Dempsey. I'm a member of RL Fiber. Oh, Dan, I'm sorry, do you have this recording? Okay, cool, thanks.
I just started it.
So I'm a member of RL Fiber, at the group that organized tonight's panel discussion on community broadband. We have a great program for you tonight and a bunch of amazing speakers. Yeah, we have a great program for you tonight with a bunch of amazing speakers from several different cities. So sorry, technical difficulties. So anyway, we have a great program for you tonight with a bunch of amazing speakers from several different cities where the local community-owned and oriented broadband network is doing inspiring work in terms of bridging the digital divide, spurring economic development, and/or driving network innovation. Before I relinquish the mic and get the program started, I wanted to say a few words about us, RL Fiber, and why we put this program together tonight. RL Fiber is an informal, volunteer-based group made up of local Arlington residents that believe that we need to build a digital landscape here in Arlington that provides world-class connection to all, is sustainable, privacy-enhancing, rights-preserving, innovative, and democratic by design. As such, we believe that we must move in the direction of treating digital connectivity as a right and organizing digital infrastructure as a vital 21st century public good. In connection with that, we are calling on the Arlington County Board to form a broadband authority and undertake whatever work is necessary to determine how we can leverage our existing public fiber optic network to create a countywide community broadband network that treats internet access as a basic utility like water and electricity, and broadband as essential public infrastructure like roads and bridges. We organized tonight's panel discussion to show what other communities with a public network have been achieving in the areas of digital equity, economic development, and network innovation, all in the hope of encouraging our friends and neighbors in the county government to dream big and be bold. One of those friends and neighbors in the county government is here with us tonight, Christian Dorsey. Christian was kind enough to attend and will now provide some remarks on the direction in which the county is currently moving with regards to this vital issue.
Tim, thank you so very much for that introduction and for inviting me to participate this evening. I really look forward to the panel and to continuing what has been a wonderful effort at mutual learning that has gone on as a result of RL Fiber's engagement on this issue. There has been, for the benefit of those people who have not been a part of it, a fairly substantial and robust, but always collegial amount of information sharing, mostly really from RL Fiber to us as policymakers, to wrap our heads around issues of not only the digital divide, which we were well ahead in thinking about, but thinking about some of the options by which we could actually deliver some real changes and outcomes in Arlington. So I appreciate that. And that mutual engagement has always been guided by what I believe are shared values. One, when we think about the digital divide, digital equity, it's typically framed from the domestic perspective of who has it and who doesn't. But I also like to think about it from the standpoint of the global divide, where we know throughout the entire world, 75% of all broadband usage is taken up by just 10 countries. So we have a couple of dynamics to this. It's whether or not the infrastructure exists, but it's also about the relative equity of how it's distributed. And those really inform my perspectives about where we need to focus our energies in Arlington right now. We have for far too long viewed broadband as a commodity. And back in the days when you needed broadband if you were going to do any kind of decent movie streaming or online gaming, or way back in the day when people were downloading digital music, that maybe was understandable. It was something that was more of a nice to have than a have to have. But we have certainly seen throughout the years, and certainly as was very well revealed over the course of the last couple of years that we can no longer treat it as a commodity that should only be reserved to the people who have the disposable income and wherewithal to afford it. It is absolutely a necessity. It needs to be treated as a utility. And when we talk about treating it as a utility, that is so that we can have the necessary federal regulation to ensure that there is a sufficient amount for every user, that it's equitably distributed, that it is reasonable in terms of the terms of access, and most importantly, or perhaps as importantly as all the rest, affordable to people based on their needs. So we can't think about this as a commodity. And I don't think anybody would look at the last year and a half, 2 years, where we have seen that broadband is the necessary prerequisite for people to participate in education, for many people to participate in work, for people to get access to their doctors, to secure their health care, and the always present need to exchange and get access to information that is only going to be available to people in the robust way through broadband connections. I would think that all of us would agree that those things are not commodities, and therefore the conduit to actually participate in them should not be treated as a commodity as well. So as we in Arlington look to try and make sure this did not, the lack of broadband, quality broadband connectivity didn't affect our most vulnerable residents, we engaged in a series of what I'd like to call emergency targeted spot solutions. Where can we identify areas of need and how do we fix those needs? But as we move beyond the pandemic and we embrace our new normal, we have to think about not just targeted spot solutions, but universal ones. Universal solutions that do deliver on the promise that there can be sufficient enough broadband that is reliable, that's got the needs that are suitable for everyone and can be scalable as those needs grow. And whether you have the ability to have quality broadband shouldn't be determined, based on whether you hit the geographic lottery and live in certain neighborhoods where people want to invest in. It shouldn't be available at an affordable price only if you bundle it with other services from a particular provider. We've got to have a new thinking of this, much in the same way that we think about water, we think about power. And so we in Arlington have endeavored to study this issue to figure out what our moving forward solutions are. And like I said, we had been pretty much thinking about spot solutions, but we have since rescoped the way we think about it very much due to the positive contributions of Oral Fiber to ensure that we're moving towards a more universal approach. And therefore, we have done what we can do in local government, set aside some resources to study the issue. We are working right now to expand the scope of that study so that it is not just simply looking at the narrow lens of how we might do better, but how we might come closer to delivering on the vision that I outlined earlier. And I do want to say, just as a caveat, I'm here tonight speaking on my own behalf. My views don't necessarily reflect any other member of the board. But with that, we are all agreed that we want to make sure that we study the right things. And that is universal solutions where we can have a sufficient enough scope so that we can come up with a locally preferred alternative for how we're going to address these issues to deliver on the values that I outlined earlier. As part of that, we are redirecting some funds that were previously devoted to a spot study. Those are going to go along with additional funds that our county manager is going to put together so that we have a comprehensive approach to come up with that locally preferred alternative. And during the time that we are not only scoping the study and selecting the consultants and engaging in the work, we look to engage with the community and particularly Oral Fiber as we move that forward. So Thanks a lot, Tim, for the opportunity to say a few words tonight. I'm happy to be a passive participant in the rest of the conversation from this expert group of panelists, and happy to do anything else you need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christian. Don't think any of us could have said it better than that. I think you kind of captured the spirit of what we wanted to kind of convey in terms of why we set up this meeting, and we're very happy to hear you kind of resonate, or that kind of to mirror some of that sentiment back to us. So, and I would also just like to thank, in addition to Christian attending tonight, for all the county staff that are here tonight as well. We certainly very much appreciate that you all tuned in to learn and hear from the experience of other cities. So, without further ado, then I'd like to move into the program for the evening. We'll have 4 speakers tonight. I'll do a formal intro for each one before their individual presentations. Although I do apologize to the speakers in advance for what will undoubtedly be a truncated bio. These folks all have very storied careers. So after all of our guest speakers have presented, we will open up the general questions from the audience, and you guys will have your chance to learn more past what they present. So our first speaker for tonight will be Deb Socia. Deb is the president and CEO of the Enterprise Center, a nonprofit that nurtures innovation in Chattanooga, Tennessee, with the goal of connecting people to resources and building an inclusive community. Growing the entrepreneurial ecosystem and the innovation district, building digital equity, and supporting research and implementation of smart city applications are all part of the organization's focus. Prior to her current role, Deb was the executive director of Next Century Cities, a nonprofit that supports community leaders as they seek to ensure that all have access to fast, affordable, and reliable internet. A fun fact about Deb is that she previously served on Arlington's Broadband Advisory Committee, and so she already knows all about us. And tonight, Deb will be speaking to us about a range of innovative programs being enabled by Chattanooga's municipal broadband. So I will shut up now and let Deb take it away.
Thanks, Tim. It's really a lot of fun to be here again and to see faces I know. I appreciate having the opportunity to share my current work. So I've been in Chattanooga just about 4 or 5 months prior to the pandemic beginning, if you can imagine. So it's been an interesting circumstance. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we got municipal broadband and what the outcomes have been for our community. EPB was founded way back in 1939, and they are an independent board of the city, and they're called our Electric Power Board. And of course, initially, they just provided electricity. But you'll remember during the gig hype, you'll remember the whole Google gig, pick a city thing. They at that point in time, EPB was also able to secure a $111 million grant from the Department of Energy, specifically to build out a smart grid. Which, the whole purpose for that smart grid was to reduce outages, improve response time, help customers manage power usage, which I can tell you they do well, because if my power usage goes up, they actually call me and say, hey, Deb, what's going on? So it's been really helpful to work with a community-based utility. But they leveraged that smart grid and they built out fiber to the home. And since 2010, they've actually had a gig symmetrical available for every person that lives or works in our county. And then in 2015, they actually got to 10 gig symmetrical, and they do have some folks purchasing that service, particularly people who have huge files. Think of X-ray technicians or people who do video editing, things like that. But we had some independent research done, which came out in 2021, and it was done by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Bento Lobo. He's an economist that works at the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga. And he did a 5-year study, and in 2021, the 10-year study came out. And what he discovered was there was $2.69 billion with a B in community benefit in those 10 years, almost $2.7 billion worth of community benefit. Entrepreneurs during that 10-year period raised $1.2 billion in equity and crowdfunding. And they were able to attribute 244 million of that just to the fact that we had fiber. We're part of the Smart City Collaborative here, Smart Community Collaborative, and we have raised $110 million in smart city research. So that's money coming into our city from NSF, federal, like the Department of Energy, and so, really helping to infuse some capital into our community. EPB provides back to our community money in the pilot program, payment in lieu of taxes. I'm sure you've heard of it. They've paid back in the 10 years, $60 million in pilot payments to local government. So, they have been a great partner here that has had a huge impact on our economic development. We've gotten a ton of awards, but probably one most relevant today is the best place to remote work. So in other words, when everybody had to go home to work, and some of these companies said, we probably won't ever come back to brick and mortar, people by the droves left big cities where they were very cramped together and came to places like Chattanooga. So we were named the best place to remote work in 2020. We've gotten a lot of other awards too, but that one's kind of an interesting one. One of my favorite parts about EPB is customer service. When I lived in DC, to get my internet to work properly, I counted 36 different people I talked to before it was fixed. I had 3 people visit my apartment and 36 people. And when I call EPB, I'm talking to a person no matter what time of day. It's usually somebody I know. And they would even help me with things like setting up an email account. It's really fabulous. So there's a lot less stress and frustration. It's a lot easier for novices to be engaged. Now, the other work that we've done and spent quite a lot of our time on, and I heard Council Member Dorsey talking about it, and that's the digital equity side of this work. So, and this just so happens to be Digital Inclusion Week. I don't know if you knew that, but if you check on Twitter, you'll see DIW 2021 is the hashtag. So it's kind of an interesting and opportune moment for us to talk about it. But our organization, the Enterprise Center, runs the digital equity efforts for the city and around the county. And we run a program called Tech Goes Home that I helped to start in Boston and brought here many years ago. And now I'm like back full circle. Running Tech Goes Home again. But this program provides a new Chromebook computer. The participant pays $50 copay. We raise to the folks in the community. We work with over 100 partner organizations across the city, from libraries to churches to community centers. And then we help the participants to get low-cost home access. Now, we do have Comcast here, and their program's pretty good. It's hard to sign up, and has some quirky issues, but it's probably the best plan out there by a big ISP. And we would sometimes recommend that. The other low-cost plan we had prior to the pandemic actually had a price tag of $27, which was too high. It was 100 megabit symmetrical, but that was still too high for our low-income folks, because affordability, as we heard earlier, is a really huge barrier. So the reason it was 27, I know you will understand this because Virginia has its own issues, but Tennessee has a state law that limits our capacity to reduce the cost of service below the cost of provisioning that service. So that was a huge issue for us. And so it had to be $27. And so then the pandemic hit. And so we had to come up with short-term solutions, which I understand Arlington County did as well. But in the short term, we worked with EPB, our partner, to put 110 public Wi-Fi hotspots that are free with gigabit backhaul. So that's a really powerful backhaul. And folks have used 85 terabytes of data on that since we put them up. So you can tell they're really well used. We used a lot of GIS mapping tools and data sets to figure out where we should put them, right? We want them to go where the greatest need is. And then we got all of our folks to open their networks, created a GIS map so you could look on your phone and find directions to the closest one to you. We knew that was a short-term solution. We also recognized how lack of access impacted everybody around us, but certain segments of our population more than others. And that was, faith-based folks, especially our small churches here, small businesses, recovery services like Alcoholics Anonymous, telehealth, folks who had to engage in telehealth, telemental health, working remotely or teaching remotely. And so we needed to move fast and do something better than what we were doing with the Wi-Fi hotspots. So our long-term solution was one that is creative because we have that state law to deal with. But we raised money to buy all the equipment necessary to build out every single apartment, home with an optical network terminal and a router, right? So that they could have high-speed internet. And then worked with the city and EPB to do a consolidation of the billing. And we now are able to provide every free and reduced lunch student or every SNAP student whose family receives SNAP with free to them 100 megabits symmetrical is the low end. It's at least that. Many are getting 300 symmetrical for the next 10 years. So this is not a short-term solution, and it'll probably be more than 10 years. Now, what we had to do to make that happen was raise the 8.2 million for the equipment and find the funds for the next 10 years that it would cost us to make it work. And so we've been able to come up with funds or commitments for $15 million, which doesn't seem like a lot when you think about the impact on 28,500 children, right? Who otherwise would not have learned from home. And the thing that I think is so interesting about that is that almost all children or all communities lost ground academically. Chattanooga gained ground academically during the pandemic. And so that tells you something about the value of having high-speed home access for every child in your community. Now, we're not done doing that, but we're getting closer. So no cost to the family, 10 plus years. And we also created something which I offer to anyone on the call. We created something we call the Resiliency Kit for our very tiny businesses that helps them to organize everything they need in order to be prepared in an emergency. And if you're looking for that, I'll drop my email in the chat later. I'd be happy to share it with you. It is open source and you're welcome to take it and make it your own. But that and workforce development projects, these are all things we have done with EPB and worked with EPB on. They have been fabulous. And what I think is most interesting about this is that we could not have done these things had this not been municipally owned, right? Because what we're able to do, we all know each other. We work a few blocks away. We all get together on a regular basis and work on some of these projects. What I tell folks is the time to develop your network is before you need that network, right? So having had all these relationships made this process so much easier. But we couldn't have done it if we hadn't had EPB. And the president at EPB, David Wade, is amazing and just really cares deeply about finding solutions. It wasn't, I don't know how to do this. It was figure it out, right? The answer no is not an option. We need to figure out how to do it. So being able to be flexible is one of those things that a municipal broadband network can actually do. And their definition of profit is very different than the definition of profit for an ISP, right? For them, their profit is quality of life for their residents. Those are the stakeholders in the circumstance. And the definition of profit for a big ISP is money. And they're looking at their shareholders instead of their stakeholders, right? We're able to look at people and say, we need to take care of you. The other thing they do incredibly well is partner. They've partnered on a bunch of our entrepreneurial activities over the years. They've partnered here in the school program. They've partnered on a bunch of community resources. Just amazing what they've done to support the community. They also just are happy to share opportunities, share information, work on projects that are a little outside of their scope. They're currently working on some smart community efforts, including their smart grid and some quantum computing, right? So they're able to experiment well outside the boundaries of what a typical broadband provider might. And all of that adds value and brings dollars to our community. So I'm going to stop there. And I know there were some questions in the chat, and I'm happy to answer them after. But my understanding, Tim, is you're going to have everybody talk first. Is that accurate?
Yeah, Deb, that's accurate. Yeah, we're going to just kind of go through the presentations and then kind of corral you all. And I think that way you guys can kind of help each other out and sound off on each other. So, okay. So anyway, well, thank you, Deb, for the wonderful presentation. I just want to say that Chattanooga's network was already an inspiration to all of us in the community broadband fan club. But the work that you're doing there at the center is just fantastic, and I hope that all of us will be able to replicate just a fraction of it, even to make it go forward. So thank you so much for your presentation. So next in line in our all-star lineup tonight is Brad Nosler. Brad is currently the general manager for Highlight at the city of Hillsboro, Oregon, where that's the name of their municipal fiber optic broadband system. Brad has led efforts to build Highlight system operations from the ground up. Prior to joining the city, the vast majority of Brad's professional career had been in the fast-growing cable telecommunications industry. Beginning in 1983, he spent more than 33 years in the cable telecommunications and broadband industry, serving in a variety of leadership roles. Brad was previously vice president of marketing and sales for Comcast and NBC Universal from 2010 until 2016, and held positions of senior director of product marketing at Comcast, director of marketing with AT&T Broadband, and director of government and external affairs for Telecommunications Inc. Tonight, Brad will be focusing on the Highlight Network's Bridge program, which is a groundbreaking approach to bridging the digital divide. Brad.
Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you, Deb. That was very interesting, hearing what's going on down in Chattanooga, and has been for a long time. In Hillsboro, and let me give you a little bit of background about Hillsboro. Hillsboro is a community of about 105,000, about 50,000 households passed on the outskirts of Portland. It has a reputation of being very high tech. There's 3 very large Intel campuses in Hillsboro alone, and several other high tech businesses. It's the home of many, many data centers. And Nike, well, their main campus is in Beaverton, just a short hop away. They've got facilities and a lot of employees out here too. It's not a community that you would describe as underserved or unserved in any stretch. Yet, well, there's pockets of there's areas of Hillsboro that have 92% broadband connectivity. There's areas that are less than 50%. And it's a ethnically diverse community. It's about 25% Hispanic, Latino, Spanish speaking. And so there's a lot of different needs within the community. And the city has viewed Highlight, and I'm going to share my screen now, if I can get to the share screen button here. And let me know when you can see this. Got it? Okay, good. So the city, frankly, after Hillsboro was selected as one of Google's targeted communities within Oregon, the city council at the time, and I was not working, I was actually in the private sector at the time this was going on and paying a lot of attention from the other side. But the city council was not happy with the Google approach of the fiber hoods and kind of going into areas that were more affluent first. And in fact, they had the exact opposite priority, and that's going to underserved, well, not necessarily underserved, but underconnected areas of the city, and trying to increase connectivity. And so that's what we've done. We've started building out the network. We're still very new in the sense that we've been launched only in a very small portion of town so far that's built out and activated for a little less than a year now. We started doing testing about this time last year and have launched in that area. But that area happens to be one of the lower connected portions of the community. And in order to elevate connectivity and quote unquote bridge the digital divide, the city, we put together a program that we call Bridge. And it's not wholly unique. I mean, it's what makes it unique, I guess, is the speeds that we're offering to the eligible participants in the program. But I'll just take you through that program very quickly. It's again called Bridge. We're offering 1 gig to this lower income qualifying group. There is criteria, which I'll go through in a second, but it's built on the core values for Highlight. And part of our branding process was to identify an identity and the core values behind it. And those core values are there on the left, part about building community, creating opportunity, and that's for residents and users as well as businesses. Keep it simple, have an equity element, and serve the city that we love. So Bridge has 1 gig of service. The offering is what our Wi-Fi management service is basically we get the subscriber completely configured. It comes with a Wi-Fi 6 router. We get them set up with their passwords. It comes with an app that they can manage the system from, and there's no installation fee, and that is $10 a month. And that's one of the other differences within the program, which I'll go through in a minute. But the Bridge participants then requalify every 12 months. That's they get this offering for a year. If their circumstances change and take them out, we still have, by the way, our regular everyday low price for retail rate for 1 gig is $55 a month, with the Wi-Fi management being an optional $5 extra. So that's our regular pricing, which is, by the way, in and of itself lower than the 1 gig offerings for the other 2 service providers that are here in the community. We, like I said, we're not unserved, we're not underserved. Both Comcast and Ziply Fiber are here. Both offer 1 gig services. We offer beyond 1 gig. We offer 2, 3, and 4 gig options as well, which they don't. But this Bridge program is more limited to the lower income qualifying audience. So how do you qualify? The eligibility for Bridge, there's categorical eligibility, and we've got a whole list of programs that if you're enrolled in one of those, you automatically qualify for Bridge. That includes SNAP and TANF and the Oregon Health Plan and a number of others. But you can also qualify through income eligibility, and it's based on 185% of the federal poverty guidelines. And but by and far, almost everybody who's qualified, and it's not very many yet because we don't have a very big footprint at the moment, but almost every one of them come in because they've qualified by being part of one of these other programs. We are not, it's not something that we want to be doing to be collecting personal income as the city and managing that. So our process, again, there's 2 ways of qualifying. We've partnered with 3 local community organizations, all of which have access to the databases that would allow them to confirm eligibility on any of these verification criteria. So Community Action, frankly, has been our most active and involved partner. Salvation Army, though, had a long-standing relationship with the city's water department, so we brought them into the program too. And then Centro Cultural has obviously connections within the Hispanic community, so they've been a good partner as well. And again, we've trained all of these partners, given them opportunities to, heard their feedback on what's easy to execute from them, and really devised a process that makes it pretty easy, not only for these organizations, but particularly for the end user. And so our process, and just to walk it through, I'll talk about connection partners in a moment. They're part of the outreach and marketing, but the potential customer would go not to us initially, but they would go to one of those 3 verification partners where they would have their eligibility determined and verified. If the results are, it's really just as simple as a kind of a thumbs up or a thumbs down, yes or no. Yes, they meet the criteria. No, they don't. We haven't, I think we've only had 1 no since we started going with this process. So it's very simple. We just simply get an email from one of the partners. And then we have our customer service reps call them back within 24 hours, get them scheduled, get the order entered, get it installed and provisioned. And so, if in the event that they do not qualify, we still call them back and can talk to them about the other service options, including the $55 1 gig service. So again, there's Comcast has their Internet Essentials program, which has been a long-standing program. I think it started in like 2006 or something like that. It was right when they were Comcast was acquiring NBC Universal, and they're at $9.95 a month, but they're also at local fees and taxes, which they add on and itemize. So they're above $10 really when you consider those additional costs. We don't add any additional fees. Ours are, it's just one simple price, trying to keep it very simple. They're at 50 megs with 3 up, and we're at 1 gig symmetrical. They offer in-home Wi-Fi, we do too. Their installation's free, so do we. We do not yet have this, but Comcast does have a program for providing low-cost computers. And they've got scope and scale, so they have been able to put this together for their nationwide program and make that available because, and I'll mention this again later, getting the connection is just one thing for some of these audience. Some do not have a device. We have a great deal of connectivity to the internet through mobile phones, but what we're really talking about here is wireline connectivity at these gig speeds. And then Comcast also has up online a whole wealth of online education materials for Internet Essentials program participants. We don't have that yet, but again, as a city, we've got some resources that we will in the future and start to build out. So I mentioned the outreach and those connection partners. We've, beyond the 3 partners that we use for verification, we also are engaging with local organizations that can help promote, if you will, the program to audiences that may likely have a need or an interest or an ability to participate in it. So that includes faith groups, it includes school district, it includes other social organizations and low-income housing organizations like Sienna Star. So we've got an ongoing effort to first educate them and then enlist their support for having brochures, being able to have an awareness themselves of the program so that they can have conversations to those who might need it or might want it. We have had conversations with a low-income organization, Sienna Star. They have a number of properties, or 3 larger properties in town. Our network isn't built out to any of the 3 yet, but when we get there, we will have the ability to coordinate and partner with them to do on-site activations, because if they live in that property, they automatically qualify for Bridge as well. And then we do, in fact, market Bridge. We have to do it companion marketing with our other, general marketing. We'll include a buck slip or some other piece specifically calling out or promoting the Bridge opportunity. It's not going to be for everybody, but we want to raise awareness of it. We've done some target marketing. We've got displays and things at the libraries where the libraries are equipped with rows and rows of computers for members of the community who don't have computers to come in and get access. But the libraries have allowed us to put up brochures about Bridge right in that area. And we've got brochures and collateral materials that we try to distribute whenever and wherever we can. We've door hung doors as part of our communications efforts. So we're trying to build awareness through marketing. We've also tried to build awareness through participation in local community events. It was just this last summer, as you can imagine, our event season in Oregon is limited to about 4 months. So we did some summer events with our staff and our promotional materials, just again to engage people with not only Highlight but Bridge specifically. And then we haven't gone. We're not with the sliver of footprint we have right now. We have not done any kind of media outreach, but we will. We're close to getting a couple more areas activated, and as we get a little bit more scale, it might be appropriate for us to go here. Again, heard what was going on in Chattanooga, but as I mentioned before, and as Comcast obviously has realized, being able to serve this audience effectively isn't just about the connection. It's also about making sure they have a device that's compatible. And not every laptop's going to be able to realize the full 1 gig, but being able to get a device other than a mobile phone is something that will become part of Bridge in the future. We don't know what that looks like yet. We don't know what partners we might have to make it happen yet, but it is on the radar screen in the longer term plan. And then finally, I mentioned the library opportunity for us. Comcast has their online educational stuff, but we have the ability to bring members of the community in, bring in guest speakers, and talk about things related to keeping safe on the internet, how to best facilitate online education opportunities, and other things that might help them get the most out of the Bridge service. So with that is the quick overview. And again, happy to take questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you so much, Brad, for that amazing presentation. The Hillsborough Bridge program, I just think is really inspirational, especially just the speeds that you guys are providing and all the work you've done in order to do outreach and really build a community effort around that. So I hope that's the thing we can all replicate here as well. So I following Brad, I kind of wanted to teleport us back here to Virginia for our next speaker, namely Portsmouth, Virginia. And we're going to hear from Daniel Jones. So Daniel has served as the Chief Information Officer for the City of Portsmouth, Virginia since January 2016. Daniel strategically leads 33 employees, encompassing 3 divisions of the Department of Information Technology. With more than 20 years of information technology experience, Daniel strives for a holistic approach to information technology through digital inclusion. Currently, key initiatives include the transformation of Portsmouth, Virginia into a smart and secure city, as identified by the City Council. Those initiatives include a municipal broadband fiber network and connectivity of unserved and underserved communities. Additionally, Daniel serves on advisory boards of Virginia Cyber Alliance, Hampton Roads Regional Broadband Steering Committee, Southside Network Authority, and AHAC Cybersecurity. Daniel holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration, a Master's degree of Business Administration, and a Master of Science in Managing Information Technology. Daniel will talk to us tonight about how Portsmouth has formed a broadband authority to undertake a number of public interest initiatives, including in the realm of digital equity. All right, so Daniel.
We good?
Yes.
So good afternoon. Thank you, Tim, for the opportunity to come on and speak with everyone. I just want to thank the prior panel there. That's some great information, great programs to help, what community broadband is all about. To give you a little genesis regarding Portsmouth. We are in the heart of Hampton Roads, which encompasses about 17 jurisdictions, plus or minus. But Portsmouth is right in that heart. We have a population about 95,000. This is a very military-centric area. But what we focused on when I first arrived and began my, I'll call my public career, I was in the private sector before coming to the government side, was to look at our connectivity as a holistic approach. That began by just, what is the city using from municipality-wise? And when we started to look at that, we knew that we had some challenges ahead. So the first thing that we done was complete a strategic fiber master plan. This fiber master plan took into account all aspects of what creating a municipal owned network would entail, all the way from the planning, your community anchor institutions, your laterals, your construction, your project management, all the way down to your electronics. Once we completed that, the return on the investment made the opportunity basically a no lose scenario, if we have to say such that. It basically was that the city should undergo this. So the network began as just a government-funded capital improvement project. Construction began on that about 18 months ago. We are literally on the 1 yard line. We're 99% complete. Most of it is done. We're just tying the last few ribbons and knots around it, as we'll say. But that was planned strategically for the reason to not only assist what the government does in service delivery to our citizens, but also to help bridge that digital divide gap. Now, while Portsmouth is within the center of Hampton Roads, and if you take the total population of Hampton Roads of 1.7 million people, you wouldn't think that there would be a unserved, underserved issue. But there actually is. Depending on where you live in one of those localities, you're going to hit one side of the paradigm or the other. Portsmouth is more of the underserved market, while depending on where you live in the city, you have one provider only. So from just a consumer spend perspective, if you're not satisfied with that provider, you have no alternative. And that's if you meet and have all the other socioeconomic factors already in mind. That's assuming that you have connectivity, you can afford it, you have the devices and everything prior to that. But if you're not satisfied, you have no alternative. So when we started looking at that, we knew that when we built this network, that there would have to be the need of helping to offset and close that gap. And that's why we basically overbuilt this network for that specific reason, with the intentions of moving forward to leverage additional providers, additional connectivity, and to stretch it out across the city. But specifically where we want to get to tonight is with the community broadband aspect of it. So as we were finishing our construction, we launched a strategic connectivity study. So this connectivity study took in all citizens, all residents of Portsmouth, and we drafted a statistical analysis surrounding what their connectivity is. And we had them answer questions. We sent out a mailer, had it come back. We then aggregated all of the data. We also took the publicly available data, the FCC data, all of that, what the providers offer, what they say they offer, and all those different aspects. But when we put that together, and we kind of knew where it was leading just by the concerns of the citizens that we had heard that had went before city council, that had talked to the executive management about the troubles that they had with broadband. It ranged anywhere from, I'm not happy with my service. My service is either not cost affordable. It's too much for what I'm receiving, massive outages, whatever the plethora that was. But what we knew going in, and what was reaffirmed by this study, was that there was strategic pockets within the city that there was literally, even though there was a provider there was a broadband desert as far as who was connected. We know that we refer to a desert as no option there, but from the other side of the coin, there was a very low adoption rate of broadband. And those were mostly surrounding our housing authority areas. So that's where we begin to look at how do we resolve that. And part of our analysis on the forefront was that part of our municipal network connects every one of these housing locations as part of their connectivity being part of the city, but it also leveraged enough that we can then extend service beyond that. So we all know the intricacies of Virginia or even Tennessee and the legislation about what you can and what you can't do. I'm not going to belabor everybody's point on that. But that's where we realized that we had to do a broadband authority to be able to fill this gap for our citizens. The option from providers there has been mentioned before. What they refer to as just their starter pack or their basic connectivity pack. But what always got us was the fine print attached to that. So it may look good from I'll say a marketing standpoint that it's this bandwidth, it meets FCC requirements, it's low cost. We can sit here all evening and talk about what $10 is. $10 is lunch for most of us probably. But when you're trying to figure out where your next meal is or what you're going to do, that $10 means a whole lot, whether you're going to buy a monthly subscription to broadband or not. But also the restrictions attached to, most had to have a school-age children. Now, while that's great for the program, that you're not being inclusive with everybody that is experiencing within this gap. You have those that do not have school-age children that are just trying to remote work, trying to remote learn, trying to apply for a job, just communicate in general. And it's been said, we're beyond the broadband being just a luxury item. It's a utility now, has been for quite a while. And the past year and a half has only brought that to the forefront to an even greater degree. And that highlighted a whole lot of areas that both municipal governments and as well as the big ISPs are going to have to realize that even here locally in Hampton Roads, the providers were not ready for that. Their network suffered constantly during this past year and a half. But as we begin to look at that in those strategic pockets, knowing that we had the fiber already on location there, we knew we had to extend the network, extend connectivity in some way. But we had to look at how that funding worked. How could that go from a municipal government providing a service, as well as what is the operating budget for that? And then that's when we were on probably for here is when the pandemic was really starting to increase. The first wave of stimulus come down and the governor's office announced a broadband initiative. So we proposed our project for the housing development that we had already talked about for many months prior, but we just had honestly a funding issue attached with it. We proposed that and it was fully funded to provide a complete, basically over-the-air Wi-Fi scenario that covers the entire geographical boundaries of each housing development's borders. So these residents that live in these areas will have connectivity via Wi-Fi that is no charge. There's no subscription model. There's no verification. And I think the gentleman prior to me, just by the virtue of the fact, he mentioned that by living in these areas, you automatically know that they qualify. Even if we were going down a cost model, which is not the case, but by virtue of where these locations are, no matter what the case may have been, that they would qualify for an assistance related to broadband. So as we move towards that, we're still keeping in mind just what the impact of this is. We're still gathering the data, the usage, just how much it's being used, the traffic volume, all of the analytics attached to that. But what we've seen, just I'll call the media or the marketing that the authority has worked with the city with, that residents are seeing what's happening within the respective geographic areas there, that construction's happening. We've got fiber going to each of the vertical locations for the outdoor wireless. So they're excited to have this connectivity, to know that they're not going to be faced with that decision of if they can get broadband will be there. And we're just looking to extend on that and not continue the same story that we had always heard or even had seen, where there were cars sitting outside of our public libraries well after that they were closed, just so they could get on the internet, do their homework, do their schoolwork, do job, whatever, answer email. That was a constant thing. So we knew as a city, we had to step up. And the only way to do that is if we had the infrastructure in place. If we wouldn't have had that infrastructure or the authority, there's no way that any of this could be accomplished. Because without either one or the other, if we didn't have the authority, by Virginia law, we can't do it regardless. If we didn't have the infrastructure, it does them no good to be able to connect locally if they can't get to the internet. So it was a parallel that we had to track. We had to accomplish both, and that's what we've done. So I'll take any questions as we get towards the end. Thank you all.
Hey, thank you, Daniel, so much. That's a wonderful presentation. We're so happy to hear the work that you guys are all doing there in Portsmouth. And obviously, we're very much hoping to follow your example up here in Arlington and make sure that we're getting the fullest possible use out of our existing fiber optic assets as well. And I'm sure we'll have some questions for you when it comes to Q&A. So last but not least in tonight's program is Bruce Patterson. Bruce Patterson currently serves as the Director of Entry Point Solution Services, overseeing all consulting projects, including network planning, feasibility analysis, network design, cost projections, construction oversight, and network operations and management. Bruce is a recognized thought leader behind the Ammon model, which includes automated open access and a business model that mitigates risks for cities and creates local network ownership of infrastructure that's treated as true public utility. In 2020, the Open Technology Institute released its annual survey of global internet costs and listed Ammon as network with the lowest cost for gig internet access worldwide. Bruce was technology director at the city of Ammon and responsible for network planning, design, construction, and network operations until his departure from the city in June of 2021. If you all attended our last forum, you remember Bruce gave a fascinating presentation on the Ammon model. But tonight we asked him to come back and focus a little bit more on the kind of network innovations that Ammon's software-defined network is enabling through its fiber to the home premises infrastructure. So without further ado, I think Dan is going to handle the slides here. Are you there, Bruce?
I am here. I am here. Hopefully you can all hear me. So I appreciate the opportunity to visit with everyone again. As was mentioned, I was with Ammon for about 17 years. June was, I entered an entirely new world in the private sector. Really the objective on my part was there were a lot of public entities that recognized they had capital to spend on improving their broadband dynamic, and we're trying to figure out how to do it. So I'm trying to help public entities that want to do that. The city of Ammon had some constraints when it came to the state laws that said it wasn't clear that the city of Ammon could actually be an ISP or offer services. It did appear that the city could own infrastructure. So that's where open access fit very nicely for us, and the city marched down a path of owning the fiber system and opening it up to multiple providers. So what I'm being asked to talk to you about today is how some of that open access is being used. And I'm not going to deal just with Ammon, because with my movement towards entry point in the private sector, we actually are working with a number of different locations scattered across the US on a number of aspects that have to do with applications that really only public sector is interested in and probably has the capacity to see through to its end, because the benefits are really just for the community, not for the network operator. But we'll get into that. So I want to start by, first of all, saying that, as I mentioned, Ammon is primarily an infrastructure owner operator. So as part of that, when we started to construct fiber, I had an assignment. I, in my mind, wanted to build a 50 to 100 year infrastructure. So if we could go to the next slide. As part of that infrastructure, there are some requirements, some things that you have to consider. What does it mean to build an infrastructure that is going to last 50 years? What is that investment? And you need to choose your architecture carefully and think very seriously about the vendors and the equipment that you'll purchase to plug into that fiber to create your operational network. So I'm going to refer here to a National Science Foundation body of work that was done in 2016. It was a program entitled Looking Beyond the Internet. Of course, National Science Foundation is funded and consists primarily of the universities and higher education facilities across the country. They looked at 3 specific areas as part of this research. They looked at the actual network itself. They looked at applications and where they thought that would go in the future, and they looked at wireless. So these are just quotes from their report. So I've just pulled a few quotes out of a fairly lengthy multi-page report. But what they found in 2016 is that the world is on the cusp of a transformation in communications technology. And they found that the global internet, as we move down this path, will probably be unrecognizable from how we think of the internet today. What we will do across it, we'll start to do the things we're imagining, and there will be things that we'll start to do that we didn't imagine. We're talking about self-driving cars, we're talking about sensors that are actually you're going to wear, and we're seeing some of those things already, but it's going to have an effect on these communication systems. And here's a point I'd like to make. The core network hardware infrastructure will need to accommodate new capabilities, such as dynamic resource provisioning and higher performance, while also enabling software-defined infrastructure programmability for customization and innovation. So that's a huge mouthful. You can tell a bunch of academics wrote it as part of the study, can't you? So let's talk about what that means for just a minute to help you understand the work that's taking place. Because if I'm going to talk about innovative work that's changing the paradigm, then we need to kind of basically understand a little bit of this. So let's go to our next slide. A traditional network is really hard-coded. We bring customers onto that network, and the concept is you have a service. Most people will think in terms of internet service, and they will go to the homes. And it's typically one service provider. Even if there's more than one service, as in the case of your cable company, you might have video, phone, and internet, but it's really those core services are in the core of their network, and they deliver those to all of their customers. And so it looks very similar to this. We have just hard-coded network connections that go from the service to the actual premises, and that's the traditional model. So we need to think for a minute about how that enables innovation, or how that enables next generation applications. And you can see that in order to do that, those applications and services are either going to be on the internet or they're going to be owned by the network operator. And some of these applications aren't going to function correctly if that's the case. They won't have enough bandwidth, they won't have enough resiliency, and the time lag in how you get those will be too high. So let's go to our next slide. So what the National Science Foundation was talking about was a software-defined network, wherein the network itself, think of it this way, it's like a cloud environment. It's programmable. You can issue commands to it and it will do things, and it can actually give you responses back out of that cloud and tell you what's happening there, and you can make decisions based on that. So in this graphic, we've just illustrated as a giant cloud because it's programmable. It doesn't really look any different. In fact, it'll work just like a traditional network. And for the people on the network, they might not be able to tell that it's software defined. But there are some significant advantages. So let's go to the next slide. When we add another service into this software environment, it becomes very, very easy. So adding another service provider, a second, a third, or a fourth is a matter of an hour or two in Ammon. And it would be that way in any software-defined network because you're basically just creating another virtual network on top of that physical infrastructure. So everybody offering a service has their own virtual network, and they're completely unaware of the other service providers on the network. So that does enable a lot more competition and a lot more innovation, which improves the scale of the services you can get and pushes the price down to use that infrastructure for multiple reasons. That's the benefit, because the highest cost is the capital cost to build the network, the actual infrastructure. But software-defined networking actually goes a little further than this as well. So let's go to our next slide. Not only can we add services, the edge of the network doesn't really matter because the customer's home is the edge of the network. So what that means is the customers themselves can create their own services and deliver them across the network to any other customer. That's actually happening in Ammon today. So if you own a business in Ammon, you can connect to your home across the fiber at no additional charge, and it's a private network connection across the fiber. Now, the reason there's no additional charge is it really doesn't cost anything additional on the infrastructure. There's no additional cost to the city who owns and operates that infrastructure. And if you can provision it yourself, which you can, because it's all self-service, then there's really no overhead associated for the city to do that as well. It's built into having a programmable network and being able to do that. So when we think about the network being programmable like this, it's important to note there are stakeholders. The primary stakeholder is the owner of the infrastructure. We might call them the network operator. They can program that network. They can issue commands. They have a view of the network and they can see what it's doing, give commands, pull data from it and see how it's performing. The service providers that we see on the edge that might be delivering internet or video or whatever it is they want to do, they also have a stake and they have a view into that network and they can program it. They can program it by making available services and packages in the subscriber marketplace. The subscriber can go into the marketplace and choose services. About 20% of Ammon residents take actually two ISPs, one for their home business or for their entertainment, and one for their kids to do schoolwork on, or vice versa. The reason they do that is because internet packages start at $1.88 a month, and 1 gig is available for $10 a month. So there isn't a huge cost because you don't pay for the infrastructure again. That's already covered. So that's the concept of doing programmable networking or software-defined networking. So let's go to our next slide if we can, please. So this change, though, really requires two key things that I want to emphasize. It's an architecture shift meaning that we have to change slightly the way we build networks to make sure they can accommodate this type of programming. That might involve an incremental price increase when you build it. Could cost you a little bit more. We found most of the time it costs about the same, but it depends on exactly how you want to build it. The second thing that has to change, though, is the business model. See, right now, most of the time, the internet is bundled with the wire. You can't purchase one without the other. So you have to change that business model. And if we're going to look beyond the internet and assume that there will be public safety, assume that there will be telehealth, assume that there will be transactive energy, and all of those things might not be happening across the internet, but across a local, resilient, high-speed connection on the same infrastructure. Those business cases have to be separated out economically. So the question I would ask is, just as we have at the bottom here, where will this sea change begin? Is it likely to begin in the incumbent commercial operators network, or is it likely to begin in a public community-owned fiber optic system? I think the answer is pretty self-evident because we see it happening already in community-owned fiber optic systems. You're hearing some discussion about that on the part of the other presenters here, and I'm going to talk about some other places where we're seeing this. So can we go to the next slide? So let's start with transactive energy. EntryPoint's working with a client in Texas on a $1.2 billion development that has an entire virtual network dedicated to talking to the refrigeration and heating appliances scattered throughout a multi-use development. So it's restaurants, it's retail, it's high-rise hotel, it's actual residential living, and it's apartments. All of these things have connections that talk to the HVAC units, the refrigeration units. The entire objective is to apply intelligence to all those devices so they don't all turn on at exactly the same time. And the development itself has its own power generation. So there are times when it's completely self-serving and times when it actually sells power back to the larger electric power provider in the area. All of that is done through a fiber optic system, a virtual network that's actually running across the same fiber that's delivering internet to those homes. So that's how they're sharing that infrastructure, which makes it very affordable to do both of those things on the same fiber. Hospital at home. We're currently working with a national research hospital that is working on policy to discharge patients whenever possible, 1 to 3 days early. They send them home with a device that will connect through the network. This one's a little bit unique because, as I described, it will connect through the local fiber, not through the internet, protecting security, privacy, and providing a measure of performance that they can guarantee to keep that information flowing back to the hospital where they can monitor that patient as they recover. The feeling is that paying for that network connection is literally less than 1/10 of what it actually costs to have that patient in the hospital. So they're trying to reduce cost and still provide a level of care. Let's talk about education. We're also working in a very large metro area where they have an enormous digital divide, but the school obviously has internet connectivity funded through E-rate and other mechanisms. There's a municipal fiber network there, and they're basically going to provide the school's internet or the school connection to the home across that local private fiber, so that those homes that don't have internet, their children can subscribe to the school's network, be able to connect to the school, get all of the network resources that are available there at the school, and be able to connect to the internet. And by the way, because they're actually connecting through the school, they get all of the filtering and content protection that the law requires the school to provide for those children. And they actually connect to that using their standard username and password that they used every day when they go to school to connect. And that happens across the fiber, and the experience is just like they're sitting at school with their Chromebook or whatever their device is. So this is another mechanism that is being used to try and address the digital divide. We're working with another city that has a number of Wi-Fi hotspots and is very proud of the public internet connectivity they have at their libraries. They also have a municipal fiber system And we are working with them to make the connectivity that's available at the library available at the home for buckets of time so that people can go and use internet connectivity, schedule that, and get it and use it just like they were at the library. They may open it up for more time, but they're really trying to protect that connectivity to make sure what's available there is useful to those when they connect and use it. So that's a work in progress. A lot of these things are work that's in development. We expect to see announcements from a number of these developers and cities over the next few months, but these are the types of things that a software-defined network can do to try and push the price down and the value up, very much like you already heard from all of the previous presenters. So very much like them, I'm happy to answer any questions here at the end.
Great, and now thank you so much for that, Bruce. That was really fascinating. Could look into what I think a lot of us hope will be the future. We now actually can open it up for question and answer. I'm sorry. I don't know if the speakers would be willing to go a little bit over if we have a flood of questions. But I wanted to just, I guess, if people either can put it in the chat or if you want to raise your hand and ask the question yourself, we can call on you kind of as they come in. I was wondering actually maybe if our county board member or sort of our staff might be the first ones to ask a question.
Yeah, Tim, I mean, I don't know where to begin since we got so many great presentations with a lot of information, but in terms of maybe for all of you, since I think you've all hinted at it, but as a community like Arlington, which as some of you have mentioned in the Hillsborough example, doesn't suffer from lack of access by traditional metrics, but we have certain areas of need, but we have an overall desire to make sure we're building an effective system that provides far beyond what the incumbent operators can provide. What would be the necessary first step that you would advise us to take in sort of coming up with our locally preferred alternative for how we do it, since you're all kind of doing it slightly differently, but kind of in the same way that we hope to?
I'll make a first suggestion on that. I think, the resources that Arlington already has are pretty substantial, and taking stock of what those are and what the barriers are to the current providers, local providers that might be willing to take that next step with you. I know that having laterals off that are an important part of this mix, and figuring out what it would take for you to get to that point. Although I'm here in Chattanooga and we have municipal broadband, I think the Ammon model is pretty outstanding. It provides both high-speed access, but also competition. And the way that Bruce has done this in Ammon, I can be sitting in my house and change providers. So there's a lot of resources and opportunity that come with that. And if I were starting from scratch today in a community, I would consider that model. And certainly would talk to Bruce and folks from Ammon about it. But certainly the assets you've got are pretty spectacular.
Thanks, Deb.
If I can, I will chime in a little bit here. My advice to you would be figure out the problem you're trying to solve for first. So one of the things that I think is really beneficial is come up with a list of things that you want to address, because you have affordability, you have lack of bandwidth, you have lack of reliability, and then prioritize those, because the solutions and the way you go about it are going to be different depending on what of those you want to address first. And that's kind of what you heard from some of the panelists here. Some of them are very focused on affordability. Others are focused on, we don't have any competition or choice, and that's really what we want. Others just want bandwidth, meaning it's not reliable or it's not robust enough. So we find that very helpful when we engage, is we typically get the public entity to create a list of priorities, and we ask them individually in that committee to rank them, and then we build a little matrix and we all agree on what's the highest priority. And that helps us to understand what tools are available and what's most important, so we know what to do first.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah,
I
if I
guess
could
my
also,
response would be somewhat similar, but really focusing on the front end assessments. Not only what Bruce just talked about in terms of what you're trying to solve for, but you know, being very diligent in the needs and assessment and the interest assessment within the community. You know, it's whatever model it is, and there's certainly lots of other models. There's, you know, City of Hillsborough chose to go it alone, full fiber to the home build out, and it's an investment of public dollars. It's an investment that the community is making, and there's a lot of things that you can learn after you've crossed the starting line that you could, you know, the more you can learn them before the gun goes off and you start, because you know, we're learning every day. You know, the models that were first presented as part of the ascertainment process are not the models we're looking at now. Everything is being reassessed, and the most material of which is construction costs, which are a lot higher than what was originally presented, and even take rates and market penetration levels, which of course, you know, it's important. Yes, we're the third competitor in, I guess. And you know, yes, the city considers it an essential service and it's positioning it as a utility, but we're really essentially a third entrant in a very competitive marketplace, at least in our community. And so you can ask around. I don't know what Chattanooga is, but certainly we heard some fairly large numbers out of places like Longmont, Colorado, and some smaller, more rural places in Oregon, Sandy, Oregon, and and we're not, again, it's early, but we're not approaching those penetration levels. And don't underestimate the fact that there's incumbent providers who have a vested stake in retaining every customer that they can. That's their business. And they'll do you know, a lot of marketing and a lot of promotions and a lot of other things that are hardly a surprise, but it's a real factor.
Lobbying, dispensing of goodies, all sorts of other things, right, Brad?
Well, you know, having come from Comcast, it wasn't a surprise from me to, you know, that Comcast has these lift zones now that they're investing in all over the country, and community organizations. They came into Hillsborough, not only in Hillsborough, but in our very first footprint, and invested, you know, gave $20,000 to the local Boys and Girls Club right in the heart there. So, you know, it's they're in the community too. They're and so that's you know, good for them and the Boys and Girls Club.
Thank you. I will say
Yes,
that. Oh, go ahead.
oh, I'm
Daniel?
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah.
No, Daniel, please. I want to hear from you as well.
Yeah, if my suggestion, and like they've said, is you all have a very impressive infrastructure to begin with. But if you set that aside, and I'll take the opposite end of the spectrum of what basically everybody's said there. If you had no infrastructure in the ground, my first suggestion to you, and knowing what I know about Virginia, is get an authority formed. Whether you do nothing with it or all, it's a simple filing fee at the worst case scenario. But having the authority gives you the legal groundwork to do what needs to be done. And then when you get that, you can put the authority board together. You can get citizen members, you can get tech businesses, you can get your political entities. You can get a mixture of everybody to solve the problems that they see. I don't envy anybody that's in the political realm. You all have got probably one of 10 million things you've got to worry about. So having a group that's dedicated solely to solving the broadband issue is going to be key. Because you all probably hear, like I said, 1 in 10,000 things related to broadband. Mm-hmm. But is that really a legitimate issue also? So that's what, you know, I mean, that's what I would say. That would be my suggestion. Get the authority form, because once you do that from a legal groundwork, it opens up so many more doors for a municipal government in Virginia to be able to accomplish broadband and the digital divide that you cannot do without it.
Well, thank you all. I feel like I need to pay you all a little bit of a consulting fee, but I'm not. So thank you. I'll just have to say thank you. Thank you. That was really exceptional. I appreciate that.
Thanks. Great questions, Christian. Thank you to the speakers for a wonderful range of responses, and special thanks to Daniel for his comment. Charles, I see your hand is up. Do you want to ask a question?
I would just like to hear from the speakers how important they think it is that the municipality maintain ownership of the network in their areas. There are, in some cases, suggestions that you should partner with a commercial entity, but how important is it that the locality maintain ownership themselves?
Okay, I'm never shy. I'll tell you what I think. I think you should maintain ownership. I don't think there's a reason not to. For example, when you think about all the things that we've been able to do in Chattanooga, we wouldn't have been able to do them if we hadn't maintained ownership. Partnering with another entity and working with them is fine in my mind. I think that works it so depends on your community what's going to work best. But maintaining ownership gives you so much more capacity to make decisions and to ensure that your customers are getting what they need.
And I'll actually hop in and I'll echo Deb's comments 1,000%. If you negate the ownership, then, or even to a partner aspect, I agree, we've offered to partner with our network. But I'll even say when you're partnering, if the incumbent providers could solve the problem, then they would have solved the problem. You wouldn't be in that situation if there wasn't an issue to begin with. So maintaining the ownership is vitally important. There's this, it's building a house and not living, if I want to equate it to anything.
I'll actually even go just a little bit further. So the unfortunate truth is whatever answer you give here is perceived as political. I would like to emphasize that I feel like my answer is purely practical. The private providers have been funded with public money for years, and we still have the problem. So that's really the biggest issue, is if you want to continue the same problem, you can take public money and give it to private companies. But if you're really going to fix the problem, you have to build a public infrastructure. And let's just be honest, at this day and age, we have the technical ability to outsource maintenance and operation. We have the ability to outsource any aspect of it. So don't confuse owning it with actually having to do all of that stuff. But if you're going to spend public money, it needs to stay in public ownership, or you lose all control over the deliverable and you lose all control over the price. That's what we found.
So if I can give a good example to that, thanks, Bruce. Ammon, Idaho has multiple providers. In Westminster, Maryland, they own their infrastructure, but they actually have another company that manages everything else. They own the infrastructure. They have an MOU with that particular group. And after a period of time, that period of time is probably up by now, they can have other providers on the network. And the company that they're working with is Ting, T-I-N-G. And they've worked with a bunch of other cities and towns around the country and in Canada quite successfully. So just finding that right fit is part of it, but not giving up that ownership.
I don't have anything to add to that other than, I think, there's a lot of models out there and there may be a scenario where a different model would work, but if it's my model or my community's model, I'd like to make the decisions. and we in Hillsborough, we've chosen to handle operations internally. That may not be what another community chooses to do, but at least having the infrastructure and making the calls on what you do with it is, I think, would be important.
Thanks. thank you everyone for your contributions on that. I wanted to ask a somewhat specific question, but it's something that I know has come up here. Just talking to a lot of our tenants, and since I think most of you are all operating in an urban environment of some sort, I wanted to ask about the multi-tenant environments issue. I know that the president has recently issued an executive order asking the FCC to kind of review this issue. But what we hear from a lot of people is that live in a multi-unit building is that they only have one provider, and they have no ability to switch providers because there's an exclusive contract with the building owner. And I was just wondering to what degree any of you have kind of dealt with that. And the other part I would say is somewhat corollary to that would be that we also know that here in Arlington, there's been a case where there's been a lot of buildings that were built without internal conduits and things like that to facilitate fiber to the unit, or what has been your experience with that, with the exclusivity problem, and also with things like retrofitting and the cost involved in that?
So I'll talk about the first one. Okay, I have more background in that. So that the bottom line was that multi-dwelling units, and the ISP used to be able to have an exclusive contract with them. That was actually, the FCC said they could no longer do that. It does not stop me as a landlord from having Comcast come in and say, I'll have an exclusive marketing agreement with you. And basically, so it's the landlord that's making the comment. It's not being forced by the ISP. We did have an issue with that here. In particular, when we built out our project for low-income community members, some of the MDUs did not allow EPB into them. But in general, what we find happened successfully here is if we could get to the right person at that multi-dwelling unit, someone in the landlord's chain of command, we typically could get them to change their mind. But some of the other communities I worked with across the country actually got the residents of those multi-dwelling units to work together to fight back against their landlords to get better access. I mean, it's all money for a landlord, right? I'm either getting money for my exclusive marketing agreement, or I'm going to get tenants, right? So we got to push on both sides of that. I think there's a real incentive for residents to have multiple choices as well.
I can actually speak on both sides of this, from what we're seeing now and how we dealt in this space from the private sector side. And because when I was on the private sector, this area of market development was squarely in my team's purview, and so there was a lot of push for exclusive marketing agreements. There was and exclusive service agreements. Compensation packages were crafted on securing those kinds of deals, and paying property owners door fees and revenue share were all part of the toolbox for getting right of entry agreements and extending those. So those are very real factors out in the marketplace. And when we're as we're trying to seek those same right of entry agreements for Highlight, yes, we're bumping up against those constantly. And they're longer term, 5, 6, 7 year agreements. They don't come up every month or every year. And so approximately 40% of our house addresses passed, or actually 40% of our residential homes passed, are in the MDU space. And we've been able to secure some agreements, but we're been turned down for more than we've secured. And so that when I was referencing back in terms of the market doing the full assessment up front, don't assume that your opportunity is going to be 100% of those addresses. Because and it's not just there, it's also on the commercial side, because you've got business owners that sign 3-year agreements or so, and they may be interested in the service at some point, but they're not able to move to the agreement right away. So those are all real factors, and they're out there, and just have to go into it wide-eyed. I mean, eyes open. So.
And I'll kind of echo what everyone said. And we've actually seen the problem extend beyond the MDUs. We've seen it in greenfield developments where the owner / builder has made an exclusive deal with the homeowners association, which then has another deal with the incumbent provider that all the residents just pay their connectivity as part of their association fees. While that's, it's one side of the fence, but the stranglehold on all of that was that the builder maintained the rights of way to the entire neighborhood. So while you could lobby another provider to come in there, they're not going to spend the underground construction to get it to the home, and you can't put it above ground. So by essence, they have basically limited any and all competition that would run outside of them.
I can't help but wonder if there wouldn't be a way for local policy to address that issue, Daniel, like if there were a policy in place, whether it's a dig once or a right-of-way policy that provides opportunities for utilities and or broadband providers. It's sort of like trying to get on the pole to provide aerial broadband in a community where AT&T owns the poles, right? It's a bit of a struggle there. Because it's counterproductive for them to put a competitor on a pole, right? But trying to figure out what are those policies that we could put in place that would help to mitigate some of that.
Great. So it sounds like that's a tough nut to crack. But I'm glad that I appreciate the feedback. As we're kind of also feeling our way through this, because obviously we have a lot of multi-tenant buildings here in Arlington. So I don't know if we do. Well, I guess I'll give it, since we're kind of over time already. If there's anyone who has a last-minute burning question. Going once, twice. All right. Well, I'd like to thank all of our speakers tonight. You did a fantastic job, absolutely extraordinarily informative and engaging presentations. And thank you so much for giving us your time on a Monday night. We know that everyone is probably has severe Zoom fatigue at this point. So we also thank our members of the audience who also tuned in and stayed to the end. And we will have a recording of this that we'll put up that everyone can share. So thanks again to everyone, including the speakers. And I think we will continue to push ahead here in Arlington and keep engaging with our county board and county staff in order to find, as Christian said, the optimal local solution, or alternative. So thanks again, everyone. Have a good night.